Welcome to Military Spouse World 1-to-1, a weekday podcast featuring a military family shaker and mover, helping you navigate this amazing chapter in life. Here's your host, Dave Etter.
On today's edition of Spouse World 1-to-1, we meet Reda Hicks and discuss with her the progress being made in taking the legal profession portable and ways that you can leverage a legal background wherever you end up PCSing.
Hello, Reda. How are you doing?
Hi, Dave. I'm great. How are you?
Outstanding. I'm so glad you reached out to do a show. You are one of my favorite people in the world. Really, you are.
Likewise.
You do such amazing things. You are a shining example of military spouses being able to take what is a hard-to-transport from duty station to duty station job, or calling as you might have it, and being able to make it successful elsewhere. You're one of the people that bring us the Military JD Network.
That's right. One of many now, which I'm very excited about. Military Spouse JD Network actually started in 2011. It was started by 3 women, all spouses, all really struggling to try to maintain a legal career while they moved around with their spouses. They found each other because of social media and the wonderful World Wide Web when they suddenly realized, oh, hey, I'm not the only person this is happening to. They started Military Spouse JD Network. I came along a little later, but I'm very proud to be a founding member of an organization working really hard to try and make the professional path easier for the men and women that follow us into the legal profession and want to have their own career while they support our men and women in uniform.
Now, you've been able to, with the help of others, actually make the legal career into a remote business, something that you can do.
We have. The 2 sort of big things that we've worked on is, one, for the people who actually want the traditional brick and mortar legal job, we've tried to work with state jurisdictions to reduce licensing barriers, because what's hard about the legal profession is when you do move, your license doesn't follow you across state lines.
Right.
And so basically you're starting over again every time you PCS. But that doesn't make any sense at all, because as you and I both know, spouses plug into their communities, they volunteer. When you don't have a license, you can't even give your skills away. So we've actually had to go state by state working on reducing licensing barriers for spouses who want to practice where they PCS. Again, we started in 2011, and over the past 6 years, we've actually got half of the states plus the U.S. Virgin Islands to agree to a licensing accommodation for military spouses who do want to practice where they live.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's been really fantastic, and it's a bit of a challenge because unlike some licenses which are federally regulated, each individual state has their own rules for law licenses. So it really has been, we have a group of spouses living in a certain place, motivated to make change, getting these rules done one at a time, and it's not all the same spouses. That's one thing that's great about it. Hundreds of different military spouses who are attorneys who really want to make the professional path easier for others, lobbying in their local communities and their state licensing boards in order to make change. And the fact that half of the states have gotten on board in 6 years is just really incredible. But the other thing, as you mentioned, that we have been doing a lot of work around is the virtual opportunities. The legal profession is changing. Yes, some people have a brick and mortar law practice, but a lot of people, it's a portable job. And so, there are entire law firms that are now virtual. And then there are also new models where companies will help attorneys who want to pick up and put down work plug into temporary positions. And so we've tried very hard to collect those kinds of opportunities for the people who want them and make them available to our spouses. For the most part, the legal employers who do virtual practices have been very receptive to hiring spouses because they do such a good job.
Right. What kind of differences are there from state to state in the licensing? I mean, isn't the law the law?
Well, you ask a more complicated question than you might think, because we have sort of 2 different systems of law. You have federal law.
Right.
And federal law does not change from state to state, but then each state also has its own laws. Historically, a lot of those laws have been very different. There's been a move over the past 3 to 4 decades to try to standardize a lot of those laws, but there are still some differences. Certain states place a greater emphasis on having having attorneys that are well-versed in their own state laws versus others. You have a very different personality, let's say, state to state, when it comes to welcoming people who might not have been educated in that particular state's system of laws.
So the licensing is to try and get you to, if you're going to practice in that state, to be aware of what that state's particular nuances are, and thus you don't stumble in court. Is that the idea?
Yes, generally. I mean, of course, there are always other factors too, local economies and things like that. But the biggest thing that we hear from state to state when we go to a new licensing body and say, what are your concerns about accommodating military spouses? One of the big ones that we hear is, well, you don't know our local laws, and how are we going to address that issue? What we try really hard to do is be sensitive to those local concerns. The first thing that Military Spouse JD Network did was go to the American Bar Association and say, help us come up with a model rule. And the Commission on Women at the ABA really sort of took the lead on helping us do that. So we have a model rule, but then what we do is go to the individual state licensing body and say, this is the model rule. What do you think needs to change about it so that you're comfortable it addresses your local needs?
Right.
One might say, oh, well, we want you to take an extra course of study in this before you get your license. Or one might say, we want you to be in a practice with a seasoned licensed attorney in this jurisdiction and have sort of a supervisory person overseeing your worker. The different suggestions vary from state to state, but to the extent they're reasonable, we do try and be sensitive to those state to state. And a lot of them do revolve around this education component.
Right. That's dealing with the actual practicing of law. But if you've already done, you've got a law degree, you were passed at a bar in a certain state, and you move to a different state, can those credentials help you get a job in, say, something like working in civic organizations or stuff like that? Does that give you a heads up that makes you more desirable add-on to the new business that you're in or the new community you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things, one of which is there are a lot of jobs that lawyers do that aren't strictly legal in nature. They run nonprofits, they start small businesses, they consult with people on things like real estate transactions. The skill set that you acquire through law school and through practicing law translates a lot of different places. And it doesn't just translate into the business world, it does translate into the civic world. You know, for instance, you don't actually have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be licensed in the jurisdiction that you're sitting in order to help veterans with VA claims, for instance.
Right, okay.
Having the skill set of a lawyer makes you a much better asset for that veteran who needs assistance with a claim. And so that's one way in which our members in particular, while they're trying to figure out the licensing, try to plug themselves into their local communities and give back, while the ones who want to practice law get out the licensing piece sorted.
What kind of things have you been able to do?
I'm a little bit different, Dave, because I have been all in one place. My family was a remote family, so my husband moved around and I stayed here in Houston. I am licensed in 4 jurisdictions, but I've practiced my entire career in Texas. So I've been blessed with continuity of career that a lot of military spouse attorneys don't have. That's professionally. Civically, having the skills of a lawyer have opened a ton of doors for me because there's a lot of know-how that goes along with being an attorney that I've been able to translate into work on advocacy, for instance, helping nonprofits shore up their governance, for instance. And then, you know, the other piece of it too is just having that JD next to your name sometimes opens doors and gets meetings that you might not otherwise get because there's just a little bit of a
professional courtesy.
Exactly. Thank you.
I mean, I was thinking about that going, you know, I carry a few titles that are hard to acquire, and one of which is one I just recently picked up, and that is a vice commander of the American Legion for the Department of France.
That's right.
That is something that has a lot of weight to it, and so no matter where I go, being a past vice department commander will open doors for me that used to remain closed. Is becoming a lawyer, do you recommend anybody that's out there thinking about getting a law degree by going to law school, doing it remotely through correspondence and whatnot, do you suggest that as a good choice?
That's a really individual question. I'm actually asked that question a lot, and especially over the last few years with the economy going a little haywire the way it has, is going to law school a good idea? So you really have to give some thought to it. You know, every degree that you get comes with some debt, not only monetary investment, but investment of time. And if you have a family, it's time away from your family. I say do a little bit of homework, because if there's some legally related jobs that you're interested in, whether it's actual practice of law or lawmaking or lobbying or anything of that nature, by all means, go to law school. But if what you have is a more general interest in advancing your education and opening doors, might be a JD that's right for you, or it might be an MBA that's right for you. That's a more general business degree that you can tailor to if you want to focus on policy, or if you want to focus on accounting, or if you want to focus on entrepreneurship. There are MBAs that can be structured all different ways. For instance, my MBA is actually in environmental law and policy. It's been almost as helpful to me, I think, in helping with the advocacy work that I do as my GED has, because you learn about legal frameworks, and you also, in the business environment, you learn about working on multidisciplinary teams, which when you're making change, it's really important to be able to talk to people who speak different professional languages than you do.
And if you ever decide you want to get into any kind of politics, with Homefront Rising gaining ground and popularity among spouses, actually being able to be a legislator, you kind of have to have some sort of a legal background. So maybe that's another push as to why people are thinking about going ahead and getting a little bit of law under their belt.
I do think whether it's a JD or whether it's just a course of study in law, I think it's a good idea. But getting that JD is not the only way to do it.
Right.
You can take, for instance, business law, or there are actually great courses of study in public policy at most of the universities and some community colleges now as well, where you can get this broad-based civic education that I do think is important in a lawmaker, without necessarily having to go through 3 years of school plus a licensing exam.
True.
It kind of depends on where you are, but a course of study in public policy, at least the ones that I've seen so far, are truly fantastic, not just in teaching you sort of where our laws come from, but also in teaching you how to engage your local community on those laws.
Do you ever have opportunities in which you mentor spouses on possibly getting into a bit more structured stuff?
Yes. I live in Houston, Texas, and we actually have a pretty significant post 9/11 influx on an annual basis. It's just become the case that anytime a spouse is coming here who's looking at law as a profession, whether they already have a GD or not, they're reaching out to me. There are a couple of other sort of senior spouses, although I shudder to use that phrase, here in Houston, who also advise people on the profession. And it's fun for me to sit down with people and say, okay, let's figure out what is it that you want to do with your profession, and then we kind of reverse engineer a path to get there. And then the other thing that I think is really amazing about Military Spouse JD Network is a lot of that mentoring happens in the virtual space. So mentoring, there's a formal mentoring program where you can be paired with someone, junior or senior, depending on whether you want to be a mentor or mentee. That's a great program that's been going on for a couple of years now. But then there's also just organic mentoring that happens in the way a lot of organic mentoring happens in the military spouse space. And that has been really fun for me too, because you can watch the hope come back into the conversation. So many spouses who are professionals, not just lawyers, but professionals, have hit that wall where they've had that PCS to a place where they want to work and contribute to their communities, and they can't find a way. And so they start feeling really frustrated.
Yep.
And when they meet this community and find people who have ideas about how they can do it a different way, it's like watching a 1,000-pound weight lift off of somebody.
It's one of those soul-searching moments. I realized that by doing this podcast, Spouse World 1-to-1 is one of those, because being in Germany, there's not a whole lot that I can do. And so how can I give back to my community except through helping out with the garrison, which I tried to do. There really wasn't that much call for it. So I found myself twiddling my thumbs. I didn't really realize that that's what I did by creating this, was to give myself something to do that I can give back to the community.
Right.
Reda, I always enjoy talking to you, and I look forward to having another conversation with you on Spouse World 1-to-1. We can get into perhaps some of the things that maybe is not a good time to talk about them yet, because they're still in the developmental phases.
I really look forward to it, Dave, anytime.
You bet. All right. Talk to you later.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Do you like Spouse World 1-to-1? Want to support the efforts to bring interesting and inspiring military spouses into the spotlight? Then go to patreon.com/spouseworld and become a patron. It's a great way to spread the love.
Military Spouse World 1-to-1 is a BDE Productions podcast. The views and opinions of the host or any of the guests are not that of BDE Productions or sponsors. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to Spouse World 1-to-1.